Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Mind Matters, Navigating Head Injuries and Concussions. I'm your host, Kiley Como. I'm the legal nurse consultant here at Shane Smith Law, and today I'm here with Paula Walters, founder of The Courageous Survivor and PD Walters Speaking. Paula, it's a pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So, of course, as everybody knows that's watched our podcast before, our focus here is to discuss all things brain injury and other related topics. But before we dive in, Paula, I'd love for you to be able to share with us a little bit about yourself, your journey and how your experiences kind of shaped who you become today.
So it's interesting because I'm still becoming, I'm changing every day because I was raised in a very rural area of Northwest Ohio and longtime abuse survivor. So my home was filled with dysfunction, addictions, all types of abuse. And so that kind of just led me to be a child who didn't wire for connection like we're supposed to, but kind of wired for protection. So I started learning from a very young age, unhealthy habits, unhealthy relationship, views and just unhealthy views on myself, which kind of led me into, when I was in high school, having a lot of mental health problems, having, kind of always looking for validation, which leads into, messing with alcohol and drugs and I continued that and I gravitated towards those abusive people and very much repeated the cycles that I learned as a child that my mom put up with. And so it kind of just led me into picking abusers. And throughout my journey, I ended up picking one that led into a very volatile situation in 2006, which had a near fatal strangulation. And, I thought that night would be rock bottom. I ended up in the very ER that I worked in as a paramedic, also on the fire department, but I worked there full time as a paramedic and I ended up being, showing up there with, I had petechiae and I had, all this stuff. So my private life became very public. And one of the worst parts was that he also came in there because he was an officer and everybody loved him. So one of the first things that a doctor said to me was, what could you possibly do to make him so mad? So it just kind of shifted it back on me. And that's where life, I thought I was at rock bottom, but it kind of started this 13-year journey of just becoming catastrophically sick and getting all these medical diagnoses. And man, it was just chronic illness after chronic illness and unfortunately, a lot of battles with mental health, suicide attempts, addictions. I weaved in I was a hot mess. I mean, there's nothing more to say than truly living in fight or flight and having so many unhealthy mechanisms to the point that I ended up getting to the point where if somebody couldn't help me, I had a very clear plan of ending my life because I had lost my paramedic, I had lost my driving privileges, and I was told that I wouldn't see 50. So it was a really hard thing in that, and I found the right people who kind of viewed my medical journey differently, saw me as a whole person and addressed everything. And that was life-changing. And now I'm back to work full time. I'm out traveling, speaking, and probably I would say the best health mentally, physically, spiritually that I have ever been in my whole entire life.
That's amazing. I'm almost at a loss for words. I did pick right up where you mentioned that this started back in childhood, those adverse childhood experiences. I think I saw somewhere that there's over 60% of adults had some sort of adverse childhood experience. It's just we tend to bury those things. We tend to overlook them and just gloss them over, whatnot. But yours, like many, unfortunately, just started that pattern, it sounds like, and put you on quite the journey, it sounds like, man. Thank you so much for sharing that. Really, I hope paints a vivid picture of how you gained so much knowledge and expertise and frankly, passion is obvious in what you're doing. So knowing all that, what are you seeing as some of the biggest challenges that you yourself faced in your medical journey and maybe what ultimately led you to find that hope that you seem to have for healing?
So when I'm out speaking, I show these pictures of all these silos. And so you go in with some very vague complaints. So I had a lot of like blood pressure problems. I had some heart rate problems. I was having problems with like stomach, just having, a lot of nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, or constipation, and nothing was consistent. But you go to your family practice doctor and you tell them about all of this, and then, they send you to a cardiologist, they send you to a neurologist, they send you to an endocrinologist, a stomach doctor. I mean, they keep sending you, and each person only addresses their little specialty. And I think that one of the biggest things for me as far as the brain injury side of things is I go to a therapist who addresses the symptoms from the brain or the psychology part of it. And then I go to a neurologist who only looks at like the structural part of it, but they are not communicating that they both go together. And I think that is kind of where rock bottom came, is because as I started getting sick, I had a cardiologist who wanted to put a pacemaker in me because I got diagnosed with POTS and neurocardiogenic syncope and irritable bowel and lupus. And, it came to this point where, the kind of the worst of the worst came when they said I had a very aggressive form of MS. There were lesions on my MRI and that, you decline so fast, you won't see 50. And so that was the very, very hard part. And I just didn't. So I met this doctor named Bill Smock. He is the medical director for the Strangulation Institute. And it was just I met him in Wisconsin at a conference that, for me, it's nothing more than just the world aligning for me, that I got in front of him. And so a person had kind of heard my story and then introduced me to him. And he said, I don't think you have all of that stuff. I think that you probably have a brain injury from the strangulation. And he actually called my family practice doctor, who, I go in front of this neurologist and I'm telling him, hey, this doctor thinks I have, all of this is from that strangulation. And so this neurologist looks at me and says, you can't have something happening in 2019 that from 2006. He goes, and then he started almost like victim blaming and was like, you need to stop being the victim. You need to stop living in the past. It was this very I was so frustrated. I often tell people, I think that the most abusive and gaslighting relationship I've ever been is with the medical system. And it's been the hardest relationship to leave. Yeah. Because I still have a lot of those labels from him. But when he said that and they took my paramedic and when they took my driving privileges, that one, Bill Smock believing in me and planting that seed in my head made me start researching. And I found a woman named Amy Zomer from Minnesota. She does a lot with brain injury. She has a magazine, a podcast, and I started watching a lot of her content. And I actually reached out to her and I said, hey, where did you go? Because I have a lot of the symptoms that you have. So I ended up reaching out to that clinic, and they're functional neurologists, so chiropractor with a specialty in neurology. And I went out there and I literally came back a different person. So right before I had left, I had done an interview with the Ohio State University and the Ohio Domestic Violence Network. And it's actually a video that's out there about me. And that was right before I had went out there, and I had a plan, if they could not help me, that I was going to steal Versed from work. I'm a paramedic and I was going to take my life. And I had that very real discussion with my family, because here I am, I can't work, I can't, trying to navigate the system for disability. I'm there to help people. That's all I've done as a career. And now you just stolen that from me. But I went out there and I was out there for 8 days and came back a different person. The Ohio Domestic Violence Network and the Ohio State University people noticed the difference. And I was back to work and driving pretty much right after I came back. And so I have went out there a couple times since. It really made me lose trust in the medical system, especially my neurologist, because when I came back, I asked him to test me neurologically.
Mhm.
And he said, he goes, I will not remove the MS diagnosis because it has ebbs and flows. You're just in a good place right now. He goes, that there's a reason that type of medicine is not approved by the FDA and by insurance. And he still won't remove it. And people don't understand that impacts my life. I go to buy a house and I want to get life insurance to protect, in case I would pass away in my assets. I can't get it because I still have all these diagnoses that they gave me that are gone. I went out there on 20 different meds. I am now med free. And the only real diagnosis that I have is the traumatic brain injury. And that is very frustrating for me. I just think about if I wouldn't have been able to have the financial assistance of my, pulling out of my retirement and my mom to be able to help me get through that point and being able to go out there, I would have taken my life. And I think about all the mental health, what felt like mental health struggles before I went out there. And so it makes me really think about how many people have taken their life, how many people have lost their children, how many people have resulted in aggressive behaviors because their brain health structurally isn't okay. So now they're in jail, or they've lost their life, or there's so many people out there that we need to have this understanding, because I was there. Like, I had a plan, and I just happened to get to the right people at the right time.
Yeah, so much rich info I'd love to dig into there. Boy, you said it. Polypharmacy, all those things you talked about earlier on, where you were diagnosed with this, that, and the other. And you talk about those individual physicians that treat the one, to a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So they're cardiologists, they treat the heart related stuff. If they're, neurologists, it's the MS, whatever. But that underlying traumatic brain injury, being invisible as it is, just was the driver. And that is so, I'm sure people listening to this are just shaking their heads with, yes, that's it. None of those other things did the trick, but you happened to get, you said it, with the right people, the right person, and uncover the underlying issue, the true issue. And look at that, you got off all of those medications. Turned out you didn't have all those other diseases, so to speak. That's just amazing. I know from my own experience as a bedside nurse in a neurological unit, it is an invisible injury, the brain. Whether you're talking about a stroke or traumatic brain injury, whatever, you look at a person, you can't see that. They're not hooked up to the tubes and the lines, and they're not getting all the medicines. They don't have disfigurement, but it's this underlying, just massive injury that just changes your life. And you have done a great job of describing how that feels for everybody. Well done. Thank you. So I would like to dig a little bit more into that, your understanding of that impact, those impacts of that trauma on the body, and how that changed your approach to wellness, because you seem to have a lot of insight.
So I actually just got back from the Neural Connection about a week and a half ago. So I went back out to work with, I love, truly, I am alive because of Dr. Reese and Dr. Hennis.
Dr. Reese is amazing.
Yes. Yeah.
So
I actually saw him first. And I worked with both of them, and they have really opened my eyes to, being able to better advocate for myself and to just be in tune with my body. So, I know that when I feel things, I have to kind of chase why. So I went back out there because I started getting what felt like a lot of mental health struggles. So I was having, I was very irritable, and I was overstimulated very easily. I wasn't sleeping well. My stomach was kind of getting yucky again. And I knew, especially, I was sleeping a lot, and I was starting to get headaches again, kind of in the front of my face and behind the eyes. And I got to the point where I was like, I need to come back out now, because I was getting to the point where, I was getting to where I was getting very verbally frustrated with people. And so I went out there in this reality that, and I think Dr. Reese talks about it all the time, about how my three friends, so my brain, the inner ears, the eyes, and kind of just the proprioception were not telling my brain the same story. And so I'm hearing three different stories, and the brain is getting overwhelmed, and so we had to I had to go back out there for 3 days and just kind of get the friends telling the story again. But it very much felt like and looked like to others that I was having mental health problems. And I think that being able to understand that and being able to feel, in understanding the correlation to trauma. So when somebody walks by and maybe I smell their cologne and I instantly hate them for no reason, or I feel my muscles tense up and stuff, there's some kind of trigger there, and I know that that's not about the person. Like somebody that's never even spoke to me, why would I just not like them? And so a lot of times I journal. Journaling is like that. I mean, that's a big, huge part of my healing, is because I start watching for patterns. And so being able to understand that, Bessel van der Kolk talks about how angry people live in angry bodies. When something isn't right with my body, I know that something's off and I need to find out why. Like I don't just take Tylenol or Motrin. I don't, I just don't try to cover it. I try to look for why. And that's been huge for me, because I still have the automated response to go to fight or flight. And that's just from mechanisms from childhood. And it's gonna take me a long time. I mean, realistically, I think that I have to understand that addictions I will always be an addict. I will always live in fight or flight. I just have to learn to control it. In accepting that, and understanding that is huge for me.
I think that's what so many people don't realize, is that it's not just something you can take a pill for to make it all right. Are there medications that can help with some of the symptoms? Sure, but that's not the cure. That's just symptom management. So brain injury, traumatic brain injury, concussions, all those things, that takes a long time, a lot of effort, unfortunately. And some of us, like yourself, are put in the position, have that injury by no fault of their own. It's not fair. And yet, you still have to deal with it. And in order to truly deal with it, you do have to do the work, digging in. And it is a lifelong process. You've articulated that quite well. Thank you for that. So as a medical professional, I'm no MD, but working in the medical and healthcare field for a long time, what would you wish that more medical professionals understood about this kind of trauma and its really long-term effects on your health?
Trauma, I think that people think of trauma and that it's mental. And unfortunately, it's not just in the head, as people say. It truly becomes physical, and it starts, it mimics the GI symptoms. It mimics the neurological symptoms. It can even play, havoc on the gastro and cardiac systems. And it also can impact mental health and look like, so one of the diagnoses I was given was bipolar. It wasn't that I had those fluctuating emotions because of a chemical disorder. It was because I had it because of a trauma disorder. And all of that, I think that that's just the bigger understanding, is that you have to treat the whole, the whole person. You kind of had mentioned earlier about the ACE scores. I just spoke out in LA to Kaiser Permanente, and one of the things that I told the doctors is I think that we need to start having that conversation on intakes about people's ACE score. My ACE score was 9 as a child. That really gives an open, at least it should start a conversation of, hey, she has all of these things and we can't find out why. And instead of putting her on a medicine, maybe we need to kind of look at this, like an ACE score of 9, that really could be a part of this. Because you have me having all these medical problems. I have mental health problems. I have addiction problem. It would be reasonable to have that conversation, but I think that people don't want to address that. So I think that that's the biggest thing, is to realize that maybe if we're having somebody, we can't find out what's wrong, maybe we need to have that conversation of what's going on or what has happened to them to kind of lead them there.
Early intervention, and I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about that, just generally speaking, but early identification really, and then early intervention and management of those things, starting in childhood, because that's where most of these like yourself, that's where most of these things start. They're rooted way back, and we all carry wounds and trauma from our childhood, just some way more significant than others. And so, I mean, those things can set you up for shorter lifespans, chronic diseases. I mean, just you've laid it out. And you are walking evidence of how that can play out in a person's life. So I think you nailed it. We should be having those conversations at an earlier age, involving medical, mental health practitioners, parents, schools, whomever, that whole team approach, and then keep those ongoing. It's not just a assess one time. That's it. You got to kind of watch that as the child develops over those years, because you never know. So that's a great point you bring up. So there are a lot of people out there right now, hopefully watching this or listening to this podcast, and are really kind of keying in on a lot of what you're saying. So what advice would you have for those listening that might be struggling, with some of the complex, medical challenges you've described that are related to trauma?
One is to trust yourself. Trust your instincts. If you feel that something's not right, or the advice that the mental health provider or the, doctor's giving you, and it doesn't sit well with you, and it's something that persists, keep searching for answers. I mean, the internet, and there's tons of people out there. I mean, I found healing by finding Amy, which led me to start looking into something else. So that healing is possible. And sometimes you have to go outside the traditional systems, but it's possible, but it takes work. And having a supportive system. And I think that going along with the part of the work is that I wish that I could go back and have the younger me learn about all this earlier, because I think that we don't understand how much life it really does take. So I know that the constant years of cortisol and all these impacts on my body realistically has taken years off my life. And if I would have had not been so afraid to address what happened in my life earlier, maybe I could have gotten some of those years, because, I want to be a grandma. I'm hoping to be a grandma sometime soon. And I want to do all these things, and being afraid to address the darkness in me kind of took years off of me living in the light. Like, life has so much joy and happiness, and I've been able to get there because I've been able to, as again, going back to the Bessel van der Kolk, the angry people live in anger. I've spent so many years in anger that now that I've unpacked it and addressed it, man, life is so much different. Unpacking that weight. And I know it feels heavy now, but I am telling you, it is so worth the work. I work every day, 1 to 2 hours on my brain and everything. And I wouldn't give it up for anything. It is so worth it.
Couldn't agree more. I'm a firm believer that a lot of beauty, a lot of strength, a lot of power can come out of adversity. But it does take us leaning into those things. It's not going to happen if you turn and try to run from that, and nothing good comes from that. So I think you're a great example of that truth. So thank you for sharing that. That's amazing. Well, everybody, that's going to do it for another episode of Mind Matters, Navigating Head Injuries and Concussions. Again, I'd like to extend our gratitude to Paula Walters for joining us today and sharing her expansive knowledge, expertise, and passion. Please look for her on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, as well as her podcast, The Courageous Survivor Podcast. I hope that our audience has enjoyed being a part of this fascinating discussion as much as I have, and is walking away with a deeper understanding of the intersection of domestic violence and brain injury. Please don't forget to hit that like and subscribe to keep our channel going, and keep up with our latest and greatest content. Leave a comment and let us know what you thought of today's conversation. And as always, remember, if you're in pain, call Shane at 980-999-9999.
In pain, so I call Shane. 980-999-9999. In pain, call Shane.